Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. It's a debate that intellectually one might say should not be happening in 2015, but it is. Should race be a factor in adoption? One side of the debate posits that love is enough and that it shouldn't matter if the adoptors and adoptees are of the same race. Others insist that being adopted and raised outside one's culture is detrimental to the adoptee. Our guests today are products of the debate, and they all say it's not about the upbringing, but about the adulthood. Great conversation is next on Another View, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Race matters in adoption because race matters in America. Now, that quote came from Twyla L. Perry, a professor of law at Rutgers School of Law in New Jersey. She is one of several scholars who wrote editorials in the New York Times recently debating the idea of transracial adoption and answering the question, is it harmful to children? Now, Kevin Costner and Octavia Spencer bring the controversy to light in the movie Black or White, now playing in your local theater. Our guests today have opinions on transracial adoption too, not from an academic perspective, but from real life. Ginger Savage is African American and was raised with her biological mother and stepfather, both white. Hello, Ginger.
Hello,
how are you?
Barbara. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. We appreciate you being here today. Lisa Marie Rollins, who joins us by phone, was adopted by a white family in the 1970s. She's the author of Ungrateful Daughter, One Black Girl's Story of Being Adopted by a White Family That Aren't Celebrities, which is a one-woman show that takes a comedic but intense look at her experiences. Hi, Lisa Marie. How you doing?
I'm well, Barbara. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Keith Ingram joins us. He is the marketing referral coordinator for the Family Center of Hope, which specializes in adoption and foster care. Keith, how are you?
I'm doing great, Barbara. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. So I want to start, first of all, I think with you, Ginger, because I'd like to hear your story. First, okay. You were raised by your biological mother, who is white, and your stepfather.
Correct.
Is that correct? Who's white?
That's correct.
Let
me just give you a little bit of background.
Sure.
So my parents are white, and the man that I refer to as my father is Caucasian as well. Mm-hmm. He has raised me literally since birth. And I also grew up with 4 Caucasian older brothers.
Oh, so you were the baby.
I was the baby. I'm the only girl, and I'm the only person of color in my household.
Wow.
And so, growing up, Barbara, I never really even noticed it until it was brought to my attention by people outside of my household. My household, we never talked about the issue.
So race was never discussed. You were never talked to about this is what you may face when you go to school or when you get out in the world?
Not at all. Not at all. It was almost as if, hey, we have a black sister, we have a black daughter, but we don't discuss it. It was just an undiscussed topic in my household.
So do you remember the first time that someone else outside the home brought it up to you? Can you tell us?
I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I remember I was in probably elementary school or maybe very young junior high school when someone said a comment about a reverse Oreo. Right? So I am the black layer in the middle of two Caucasian parents. And it was hurtful. And again, this is just something that I've managed to just kind of block out and not talk about. I think I probably spoke to my youngest brother, Michael, about it.
But you did not go back to your mother and father and say, this is what they said to me. How do I deal with this?
I didn't.
Why?
I don't know. I think it was just because I knew that it was just something that was unspoken in my household. And really, I grew up in such a home of love. I was never treated any differently. Not all of my friends, the majority of my friends growing up were African American. We were the house to go to. You know how
Yes, the hangout
every
house.
kid has that house?
Yes.
It was my house. And, just thinking back and just, I was just reflecting after I was asked to do this interview. Man, we were that house, and all of my friends were Black. I've never dated a Caucasian man. I've never, I was married, and that's really when things, I started to realize some things. But it was just never addressed.
So when you got married, you married an African American?
I married an African American. Again, never even dated a Caucasian man before.
And were you ever encouraged to date Caucasians?
Never
or
encouraged
said,
either way.
Either way.
Either way. It just, and
It's fall in love with who you
just
fall in love with.
who I fall in love with. And I can remember being very young and listening to NWA and, things that like rap music. And my mom probably was like, where did this come from? But they never, ever tried to push me any direction in any way.
You said that you talked with your younger brother about, or one of your, I know you were the baby, but your younger brother, about the comment that was said to you about being reverse Oreo. What was his reaction?
I honestly don't even really recall except it being supportive. And again, it was just something that I've learned to just push to the side.
Now, you have children.
I do.
Today, how old are they?
I have 3 children, 17, 7, and 4.
You have a 17-year-old, really?
I have a 17-year-old.
If you all are watching us on our stream on anotherviewradio.org, you'll see how beautiful this young lady.
Thank
you look very young for a 17-year-old mom.
Thank you.
But my question to you then is, what are you teaching your children, and what do they feel or say about having white grandparents, or do they say anything?
They do, and it's something that I really consider, Barbara, that I'm blessed because I have children who are African American, right? But then I have a whole other side. Their whole family is Caucasian. I don't know anybody on my African, not one person.
Not one person on your African
American
American
side. Not an auntie, not an uncle,
Wow.
not a sister, nothing. So my entire family is Caucasian. And so, it's interesting because my 17-year-old son, he's starting to date, and he does tend to go towards biracial girls or really light-skinned, fair, and he hasn't dated any white young ladies that I know of. He, because I don't like him to date anyway. But they recognize the fact that I'm African American and I also have a Caucasian side to me, and I just feel like what a blessing that is because I have the best of both worlds. And my kids explaining to the little ones, yeah, Mimi is white, or my cousin would be like, no, she's pale, just explaining to them. And it's just a beautiful thing in my perspective.
Your husband, when you all started dating, clearly it wasn't an issue because he married you, but was there conversation between you all about your upbringing and then how you would raise your kids, for example, or did that have any
Yes,
bearing?
It did. Actually, my 17-year-old son is really the person who kind of brought to the light the difference between me and my family. And that happened during an emotional fight one time. My son was very young. And, I was trying to take him. And he was like, you don't even know what it's like to have a father because you don't know yours. Mm-hmm. And that was like whoa, wait a minute. That was the impactful moment for me where I had to say to my mother, because I ran to the car and she was in the car. And I was like, he's right. Mm-hmm. And that is the first time, I was probably 22 years old, that she was able to address with me, the fact, admitting for the first time that I was biracial. Mm-hmm. And I always knew that I was not adopted. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew that my mom was my mom. But that was the first time that she was able to articulate the fact that I had an African American father, mm-hmm. and what the circumstance was in that particular situation, and so mm-hmm. it was interesting. It was very, very interesting growing up like that.
Lisa Marie, let me turn to you then, because you were adopted by a white family in the 70s.
Yes.
Tell us your story. Tell us what the circumstances were in terms of your upbringing.
I was adopted in the 1970s by a family in Washington State, mm-hmm. And I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, which, if you know anything about Tacoma and Seattle, Tacoma's supposedly where all the black people were, sort of like Oakland and San Francisco. But if you know anything about Oakland or Tacoma, there are areas and pockets where it's really just all white folks. And that's the area I grew up in. I went to all, white private schools growing up, and my parents didn't have people of color in their life. And my experience growing up was similar in some ways to the things that Ginger was mentioning, but different in other ways. I think the isolation of feeling like, that you're the only one in your family, you're the only person of color. I was also the youngest. I had 2 white older brothers. And also this thing of what is unspoken in your family. That was very, very clear in my house, except for in my house, it was a little bit different because my adoption papers didn't have the fact that I was black on them. It said that I was Mexican, Filipino, and white. And so part of the narrative that I was told when I was growing up is that I wasn't black. And so there was a level of denial. And anyone who sees my photo or whatever connected with the radio show today, you'll be able to, it's clear that I'm black. And so that narrative of denial was really, really strong in my house. And so going outside, I also have those experiences where inside my house, no one's talking about race, but I walk outside and I walk out the door and I'm being treated like a little black girl, and as I'm growing up, a young black woman, and as a grown woman, even when I go back now to where my parents live. So those, so a lot of those things are very, very similar, where the notion of isolation, a lot of very painful things happened to me growing up around race, around people pointing it out to me, around people being, me, even teachers and, pastors, not just, not necessarily in my family, although those kinds of microaggressions were there as well, like with aunts and uncles and even my grandparents sometimes. And I think that, there's a little bit of a difference, I think, in being born to someone and having a blood connection versus being adopted and being brought in and not having any connection at all, because there's this notion that you kind of erase the past and you come into a family without a past. And so the acknowledgement of the disacknowledgement of your past and your race seems to be much easier. So I had a lot of painful experiences with people at school, and until I think I started recognizing what race was, but I didn't have the words for it. I didn't have the language for it. My parents clearly didn't have the language for it. They're like white, evangelical, Republican, conservative Christians, and so their notion of race was basically colorblindness. We just love people equally, and everything's going to be okay. When clearly that wasn't my experience when I was walking outside or when racist things are happening to me.
Let me ask you, Lisa Marie, because first of all, you had to have. Tell us, number one, about the conversation they had with you, telling you that you were adopted. Did they?
Yeah, it's funny. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's probably part of the equation. The mere fact that they had the fact that they had to have that conversation with you about being adopted, and then also on top of that, how to handle once you walked outside the door. What kind of conversation did they have with you about what you should do when you faced racism?
Yeah. So the first question around them talking to me about being adopted. Well, one of the things about transracial adoption, it's not like being adopted into a same-race family. It's clear that I'm adopted, so I always knew that I was adopted because I'm different.
Okay.
And my skin is different, so I always knew. But I do remember, I actually have a scene in my play where, because I remember the day that I walked up to my mother and I asked her when I was going to turn white. And I asked her why everybody else in the family was white and why I was black. And because I had just come from outside where somebody was, calling me the N-word and telling me that God left me in the oven too long and all those hurtful things that children do. And I wasn't understanding that. I thought that I was going to turn white. I thought that it was just something that had happened and I was going to eventually be like the rest of my family. And, my mother sat me down at that time and shared with me the information, my birth papers, my adoption papers. And that's when the conversation came up around, me not really being Black and being Mexican and Filipino and white. And so that, I shouldn't worry about people telling me that I'm Black because I'm not. And so, their sense of that is that, they were just following the paperwork. This is what the adoption papers say. So they want, her sense, my parents' sense of that is coming from a good space. They wanted me to know who I was, and so they thought the papers were accurate. Mm-hmm. And so the next part about that is the conversation around race and being able to navigate it. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
I guess my other question was, when you heard those hurtful things, being left in the oven too long, and I'm sure as you grew older, that other things were said to you. How did they help you deal with that? Or did they have a conversation with you about it?
Yeah. So my parents came of the age in adoption discourse when colorblindness was it. So the notion of talking about race wasn't even on the table. So very similar to gender, like there was no conversation about race. They didn't have any language for it. When I went, they were basically either say, place it in the context of religion and say, well, they're just bad people. We need to pray for them and, ask God to forgive them. They don't know what they're talking about. You're a good person. But I always ended up thinking that something was wrong with me because wherever I went, people were isolating me or, calling me names or whatever, and I didn't understand it. So at some point, I stopped going to them and attempted to try to navigate those things myself. And there's also the thing of being adopted itself and the precarious position that it actually puts you in when you're in a family that is yours, but you also know that you're adopted. And so if you go and you're like, complaining or, asserting your Blackness or saying things are happening to me and people are telling you, no, you're just imagining it. Or no, you're the one that keeps bringing up race. Or no, the way that microaggressions work. Mm-hmm. That, it puts you in a precarious position because you don't want to upset, the people who are supposed to love you forever. They've adopted me. They're my family. But there's this birth family that also was supposed to love me forever, and they gave me up as well. So that idea of rocking a secure boat, you adoptees in general, whether transracial or not, want to protect their parents from things that are happening outside because they don't want to they want to be a good girl. They want to maintain the status quo.
Yeah, you don't want to rock the boat. Absolutely.
I don't want to rock. I don't know if this family will, if I start asserting that I'm Black, if I start saying that I'm Black, I start listening to rap music. I see it now with the youth that I work with. I work with transracial adoptive youth. Mm-hmm. And as soon as the young men start turning, 12, 13, 14, their parents come running to me, about the, oh my God, they're listening to rap music. What do I do? Mm-hmm. And so this idea that somehow your whiteness will protect them from the world, it's just, I feel like my parents had some of that going on where they just felt like they could wrap the veil of white privilege around me and protect me when I walked out into the streets. But that's not what happened. So I had to learn how to navigate all that stuff myself. And I think that I really didn't figure it out until I got to university and I started taking Black Studies classes and started understanding. I had a very extraordinary African-American theater teacher, and she's the one that, helped me understand my position as someone that's been dislocated from the community as part of the African diaspora and how I belong, inside of Blackness in a particular way, even though was at that time disconnected from the community. Lisa, and so it took me a while.
Let me ask you one question. I want to make sure we're clear for our audience. So on your adoption papers, you were told that you were Hispanic? Is that Filipino?
Yeah, I was Mexican, Filipino, and white.
And white, okay. So when did you discover...
I'm Black and Filipino, yeah.
Right, I was going to say, when did you discover that you were Black and Filipino?
Well, I always knew, at some point, I think it was probably around, high school or university when I basically began to assert myself as Black, even though I hadn't had confirmation by finding my birth family. But I actually didn't find the black side. I found the Filipino side of my family probably about 6 years ago, and maybe 7. And then I found the black side of my family about 3 years ago. I found a brother, and who looks exactly like me, which is totally trippy in itself.
Wow.
So
when your parents,
especially growing up, go ahead.
And I want to ask one other question because I'm just curious about this, and I don't want to be. I hope it doesn't come across as offensive at all. But when your parents said to you, don't worry about it. You're Filipino, you're Mexican, and you're white. You're not black. Was that to be reassuring because you're not black, or was that just to point out that you had other ethnicities? Do you know what I mean?
It was I think it was a combination of both. I think it wasn't, and I think for many other adoptees, I think it was like an expression of their own anxiety around blackness and their own fear of black people, or their own, hidden racisms about black people. But I also think it was an attempt to acknowledge my multiraciality and to get me to be secure in myself around that. But I do think it was at the same time trying to say, no, you're not like those other people. Don't worry. You're not really, I do think that was part of the narrative. And I do think that white parents, I think that my parents were very much a product of their time. I think that white parents that are adopting now have so many more options in terms of education. And so there's really no excuse for that kind of thing, or color, or even, participating in the colorblind narrative. So I think that many adult adoptees are coming up and writing about their experiences now. So there's a lot of things to learn around, parenting skills when you're parenting a child of color. So
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about transracial adoption, and I would love to hear from either adopters, parents who have adopted a transracial child, adopted outside of their race, or if you were adopted by a family outside of your race, and what your experience was like. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Keith Ingram, I have not forgotten about you. I wanted to hear these ladies' stories to get the context of our conversation. But you're with a private agency that deals with adoption and foster care. Is this transracial adoption, is this becoming more of a trend, less of a trend? What are you seeing?
I think that we have to be careful I'm labeling it as more of a trend, because the fact of the matter is that anyone can adopt. There are seasons where you may see more Caucasian couples coming forward with adoption requests, and also there are seasons when you have African American. However, the struggle is there's a limited request from African American couples or single individuals to adopt African American.
Period.
Yeah, to adopt, period, because of some of the misinformation that they have out there that may prevent them or steer them away. But there are guidelines to protect the child in that process. The agency I work for is called the Family Center of Hope, and we acquired an adoption service agency back in 2007, and we start parental placements. These young ladies on the line, they sound like they were adopted through an agency, not directly from their parent. We know, Ginger, that you weren't adopted, that your biological mother raised you. But Lisa Marie, do you know, were you adopted through an agency?
I was adopted through the state,
Through the state,
So she was adopted through the state. So there's only two types of adoption.
I was in foster care.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's kind of like where I'm going. There's two types. That's either parental placement, which you're a mother who's with child, gives her child up for adoption, or through a state agency that Virginia recognized. And a lot of times when we're recruiting families, we can easily recruit families of African American descent for fostering, but it's a struggle to recruit them for adopting.
And why is that? Why do you feel? What are some of the reasons they give you for not going the adoptive route?
misinformation. Some of the misinformation mean that you got to be a perfect family. You got to have a certain income. You have to be the perfect family because no family is that perfect. But, there are guidelines, there's training. And one of the things, if they get the information, they can make a more informed decision about that. However, infants are a lot easier to adopt than kids, say, from age 6 on up, or say sibling groups. But within our organization, we have youth that are in foster care. We have just last year alone seen 7 youth transition from foster to adoption. The foster parent actually adopted those children. One was a sibling group of 4. So that's a challenge sometimes when you're dealing with sibling groups and just one child. I also seen the reverse where we had African American single mothers adopt Caucasian kids. So I've seen it on both ends. So, and that's the irony of it, that every child deserves permanency. The challenge is what they experience. Their heritage was not in the equation with the decision that their parents made prior to adoption. They figure if they just leave it alone, it'll just go away and it would never come up. It sounds like the experience that both of you had. However, when you did bring it up, then you got to the root of it a little bit more. And I think that's the thing, that when a family of Caucasian descent decide to adopt an African, they need to have that discussion. What are we going to do when this child reaches a certain age? Just like you set a timeline when you're going to inform that child that they are adopted.
Okay, and we'll talk about when we should do that in just a moment. But if you're just joining us, we're talking about transracial adoption with Ginger Savage, who is biracial and adopted by, or actually raised in a white household. Lecturer, actress, and author Lisa Marie Rollins, who is Black and Filipina and was adopted by a white family in the 1970s. And Keith Ingram, marketing referral coordinator with the Family Center for Hope, which is an agency that works with adoption and foster care. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Sarah joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Sarah. You're on the air.
Hi. This isn't racial exactly, but we adopted my son when he was 2.5 weeks old. We're a Jewish family, and he wasn't from any kind of Jewish family. He's got some kind of mixed blood in him. I don't know what it is because nothing showed up in his history, but he looks like he could be part Oriental maybe. He's got olive complexion and brown eyes, and he's always taken to Judaism like he was born into it. And
so will you
I just think that's really amazing.
Absolutely. So will you raise him as a Jewish child, or will you try to find...
we weren't necessarily religious, but yeah, I did raise him as Jewish. And he just took to it.
Was it important for you?
He was born into it.
Was it important for you to also connect him with his Asian heritage in any way? Sarah, are you there? Okay, apparently I don't know what happened to Sarah, unfortunately. But I want to ask both you, Ginger, and Lisa Marie. So, as you became an adult, you had to make some decisions, I would assume, about how you were going to handle being Black in a white family. Is that right?
Yes, to a certain extent. And I thought when Lisa Marie was speaking and I kept hearing her say, I asserted myself as Black, I honestly never took a stand either way. Okay. I never felt like I had to assert myself as Caucasian. And let me just, for the record, for those of you who can't see me, I don't look like
don't look
stereotypical.
Right.
I don't even look mixed. A lot of people wouldn't even know. I look Black. I look just African American. But I found that interesting, Lisa Marie, because I never felt like I had to choose a side. As a matter of fact, if I'm filling out paperwork, I'm probably going to put other on just about everything.
Well, and that brings up another good point, because, I mean, even something as simple as the census, or as when you're filling out applications and so forth.
So, I mean, why do I have to? You know? Why do I have to pick a side? I never felt like I had to do that.
Do you tell your children whether or not they have to pick a side?
I just tell my children that they're African American.
Okay.
That's a good point. I just tell them, because their father is, and I'm
And
part
you are.
I'm part African American, and so, and they're all colors. They're all very, very paler. Some are paler than me, and some are darker than me.
What about you, Lisa Marie? Same question.
Yeah, I had a little bit of a different experience. I think that coming into understanding myself as a Black person and as part of the African diaspora was very important to my whole health as an adult. And I never actually, for me, me asserting my Black identity is not a denial of my parents.
Okay.
To me, that's actually a acknowledgement of the things that I've learned from them, that I have the ability to claim that part of myself. Whether or not they, were able to assist me in that, in the traditional ways of being able to sit me down and be like, police are going to target you in a particular way, or people are going to treat you in a particular way because you're a Black woman. I had an uncle who ended up doing that. But they gave me different tools to be able to navigate my identity and the strength to be able to kind of assert myself. And I also, and so I don't see it necessarily as a disacknowledgement of my parents by being able to claim my identity. So I want to make that clear, because I'm clear that I was raised in white culture, and I'm clear about all of those things. But that also makes me just as much, every Black person is raised in white culture, just on different levels.
That is very true. I'm curious for both of you, other family members, because it's one thing, the immediate family unit, to be okay with all of this. But, and I'll start with you, Lisa Marie, but did you face any racism from other family members, other people saying, how could you go in this direction? How to your parents, why would you do this, and how could you deal with this?
Yeah, I wasn't until later in life when I interviewed my mom for a short film that I was doing, and I asked her if anyone said anything. And she didn't tell me who, but she did tell me that there was a couple family members that questioned and didn't understand, why don't you just adopt a white baby? Why do you want to adopt, a brown baby? And so I do know that. And then there was also moments in my life where erasure was a huge part of my experience. I remember one time my grandmother patting me on my knee and telling me, "Oh, Lisa Marie, you're just a white girl." And I was like, "No, Grandma, I'm not." And so denial is huge, and disacknowledgement in that situation. But and I do think that still, even as an adult, the way that I have to navigate through my family. I mean, my family is very, as I mentioned before, conservative, Republican, evangelical Christian. So, so the way that their, values and ideas about the world, and they don't have a huge multicultural community. They live in the way that I lived when I grew up, basically around all white people in their church, in their communities, in their, their doctors, everyone is white. And so they don't have to think about race in the same way that I do. And I think even when I go home now, the way that they attempt to try to connect to me is to talk about racial issues that might be on TV, or, to bring up Obama or whatever. So, but it's brought up in a way where it's positioned as, antagonistic, like, why are those Black people doing this? Or why does Black Lives Matter, looting, or why, and, so in those instances, sometimes I, attempt to be an educator, but other times I want to remain connected to my family. And so sometimes I have to just keep my mouth shut and just have a good time, because I educate all the time. And so to go home and be able to educate my family with people who are so close to me, Sometimes I feel like that's just not my responsibility. I can't take on everything.
I would say you can't educate everybody all the time. Plus,
I can't.
home, you want to be home. I can understand that.
I would like to just quilt with my mom and go out in the garden. And so, but when I was younger, I think that's also a symptom of my age as well. I'm turning 45 on Monday. And so
happy birthday.
I thank you. So I think on many levels, when I was younger, I had much more pushback. But I also think that it was because I was angry, and also coming into understanding the way that many of us do on the university level of like, why didn't anybody tell me about slavery? Why didn't anybody tell me about, white racism or white supremacy and, the way that systems work to oppress people of color, so, and now that's just my work. That's what I do. Mm-hmm. And so it's different now as an adult, navigating my way through my family and navigating my way through their communities that I would ordinarily never be in. I think the biggest thing is the hair. I constantly have to tell people, please don't touch my hair. Yeah. But other than that, my choice is to educate or not educate. I take them on an individual basis.
Okay.
So,
let me ask you, Keith, first let me throw out the phone number again, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We are having a little bit of trouble with our phone, so if you can't get through, keep trying. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Keith, when a family, you're working with a family, they're going to adopt a child who is of a different race than theirs. Why is it important for that child to understand their biological heritage?
I think it's important because everyone needs to know their foundation. I think that it does the child a disservice to grow up and not learn that other part of their heritage so that they could avoid some of the experiences that these young ladies have experienced in life, and also be able to stand for without. Even Barack Obama talked about in 2004 being raised, but he wasn't adopted, but he was raised by an all-Caucasian family, and he's, but yet when he moved to Chicago, he struggled trying to fit that masculine African-American male identity that he had. And he talked about that, and there wasn't no blueprint for him to follow because everything that he referenced to was his grandfather, who was Caucasian at the time. He had no real relationship with his father, who was, really African-American at the time. So.
I'm pulling an article from Time Magazine on should race be a factor in adoptions, and I thought this quote was kind of interesting. They were talking about Jolie Pitts, the family, and the woman was saying she was the head of a organization, National Association of Black Social Workers, and the founder of Roots, which is an adoption agency in Atlanta. And she said even the Jolie Pitts of the world could use some help, describing one white couple who adopted both internationally and transracially. Brad Pitt said to me, "We really thought we had this intercultural thing down, but we didn't understand what race meant until we adopted our black children. That's when we got the stares." So let me say to you, Ginger, and then I'll come to you, Lisa Marie, the whole idea of and Lisa Marie referred to it also, of the white privilege being able to save you from all of the other ugliness in the world. I mean, is that realistic, and is that fair to the child who is raised in a white household, so that they may think that they don't have to deal with the same issues other blacks or other minorities have to deal with?
I think that statement is very true. I think, like Lisa Marie, I was born in the 70s. I was born in 1975. So I cannot imagine what my parents, had to face having 4 white little boys and then 1 little black girl, and how that was for them. As far as the privilege, I do feel privileged, but I feel privileged in probably other ways than what that article is referring to. I feel privileged in the sense that I was raised by 2 parents who loved me. And, I was just thinking, I went to all black schools. I pledged AKA, and I just remember when we came out and there were thousands of people there, my little white mom pressed her way to the front to see her daughter pledge. And I think about my dad, who took me as a little girl to go see MC Hammer and Bobby Brown, so
they did try to bring in your culture.
But it
and work
wasn't
with
like,
you.
hey, Ginger, here's your Black culture. It was like, okay, this is what you want to do. Let's embrace that. And so hearing these stories, when you just said about the stairs, I do know and recognize that going out with my family, of course, there were looks. And even when my parents go out with my children now, I'm sure people are like, what are these old white people doing with these little Black kids? Or when I would go out with my brother, Michael, people would look at us probably assuming that we were dating. Now that I felt the tension of anything. And I'm like, this is just my brother, but people looking at us like, they're a couple, so I felt it.
Lisa Marie, same thing to you then in terms of what Brad Pitt said and the whole idea. You talked a little bit about it earlier of the white privilege, if you will, and how that was supposed to protect you from all of this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think it's also I think a couple things. I love the quotes, because I also think it points to a inequity in the adoption world in general, that Black children are the least adopted, and they also are considered sometimes harder to place than children of color. When I was an education specialist at PACT, an adoption alliance in Oakland, which is an organization that does lifelong transracial adoptive parenting support, by the way, for parents who are looking for support. And it's a national organization, so if anyone wants any information about that, please let me know. But when I was working there, I was clear. We would have people calling interested in transracial adoption and interested in international adoption, and they would ask for every other kind of child, even a multiracial Black child, before they would ask for a quote unquote like monoracial Black child. And so this notion of like the devaluing of Black life is so connected to the way that Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie I'm saying that they didn't really understand culture and race until they adopted a Black child, because of the way that I'm sure they had to begin to start moving through the world. And I think it's the thing of white privilege is so strong, and white supremacy itself, this idea that it can protect you from anything. I don't think that people actually realize that they have to actually give up some of that when they adopt Black children. Or even I think about my...
yeah, there you are.
Hello?
Okay, yes. Are you there?
Okay, I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We thought we had lost you completely.
Yeah, and I think it's a very similar experience for white people who, might date interracially, date Black people, and to understand that race is something that people of color deal with all day, every day, and so it's going to be a part of your life if you're going to be committed to a person of color.
Okay.
So it's just, yeah.
Our phone lines are lit up, so I want to try to get some calls. And Lynn joins us from West Point. Hi, Lynn. You're on the air.
Hi.
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes. I, 26 years ago, adopted two girls from Haiti. I'm white and Jewish. Both of them decided as adults they didn't want to be Jewish, so that's fine with me. They're adults, But my daughter in an African-American history class was asked, can whites really understand Blacks and Blacks really understand whites? And she said, I've been all around this issue, being raised in a biracial family. And I've had whites who don't like me because I'm Black, and Blacks who don't like me because they think I'm better than they are because I speak educated English. And, and then my mom's Jewish and I'm not. And, but, they have plenty of self-respect for who they are. And, I never tried, like any parent, I tried to raise them with my values, but I never tried to raise them white. They're Black. Being Black is as good as any other race. You should be, they should have been proud of being Black and proud of being Haitian. And I guess my only other comment is the woman who ran the orphanage in Haiti that my girls came from was very Catholic. And so when they sent my paperwork down, they said, we're just not sure how she's going to react to a Jewish person. And she said, any family in which you are loved is better than any orphanage, even mine.
Okay. Fantastic. Lynn, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We appreciate that. Ginger, that kind of goes to your point of love is enough.
Love is enough. And I stand by that. And just, again, hearing the stories and hearing some of the experiences that Lisa Marie, went through, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that my parents really stood on that value, that love is enough.
Lisa Marie, I think you know your parents love you. Would you also go with that statement, though, that love is enough?
No, I land completely on the other side of that. I think I do believe have no doubts about my parents' love. I have no doubts about my love for them. Love to me isn't the issue. Okay. I'm clear that my parents love me, and it's why I'm able to do what I do, and it's why I'm able to be who I am. But that doesn't change my perception of the way that race works in the world and my acknowledgement of how it impacts transracial adoption. And so, I really, I appreciate the idealism of the love is enough philosophy, but many, many adult adoptees who have lived this experience have sort of debunked that idea of colorblindness and love is enough and say love is key and important, stability is important, permanence is important, the family unit is important. And why do transracial adoptees have one of the highest rates of suicide in all of adoption? Why is it that we're constantly, even Asian adoptees are racialized in violent ways? And so and it wasn't even actually until I began doing my research on transracial adoption and moving out into the world of adult adoptees who were doing research and speaking about their experiences that I started to really be clear about that it's possible to hold both. It's possible to hold the notion that my parents love me and be able to critique what I think is a system that supports it, the breaking up of African American families, and a system that supports taking children from their mothers and doesn't actually do anything to keep children in their homes. So,
which is a whole nother conversation for us to hold.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know what? We've only got about 4 minutes left, and I want to ask each of you something very quickly. And Keith, I want to start with you. If a family is considering becoming an adoptive family and they're considering doing a transracial adoption, what is the one thing you want them to think about as they look at this option?
Educating yourself with the culture of the child that you're determining that you want to build your life around, so that you can empower them as they go on into adulthood to be able to identify with who they are in the world's eyes view. That's what I would encourage families to get educated on that culture of that child.
And if people want some more help from your organization, what's the phone number?
They can call us at area code 804-684-2555. We have orientation classes, information classes monthly, and they can call in, and we'll be more than glad to have them to sign up.
All right, and we'll have that information on our website also. That is Keith Ingram, and he is with the Family Center of Hope. Lisa Marie, very quickly, what would you tell people that you want them to know if they have a transracial adoption, in the middle of one now, or they've adopted a child and they're trying to figure out what to do?
Yeah, I would echo what Keith has said, and I would push it even a little further with specifics and say, make sure that your community looks like your family. Don't make sure that you have adults of color in your life as well as children of color. Reach out to organizations that do education on transracial adoption, to have a community of transracial adoptees, as well as your connection, developing your connection to the child's community of culture. And so I think both need to be operating at the same time. So that's my advice.
Okay, and where can we see Ungrateful Daughter, one black girl's story of being adopted by a white family, who aren't celebrities, by the way?
That aren't celebrities. So Ungrateful Daughter's been touring for a couple of years now. I'm actually in the middle of writing my next solo show, but I take it around to universities. A lot of the times I've been pretty much all around the United States, but if people are interested in having me come, I would love to come. I've been with agencies, at transracial adoption camps. I've been kind of all over. So, and yeah. So, and at some point I will get it online so people will be able to view it.
And you also said that you're doing some educating with transracial adoptees. What's the name of the organization, and how can we catch up with you?
Yeah, I don't work for them anymore. I used to work for them. The organization is called PACT, P-A-C-T, an Adoption Alliance. And they have a amazing summer camp that is both for adoptive parents and for transracial adoptive children. Amazing group of counselors that work with the children. And then during the day, the parents actually go to workshops and talk about strategies, talk about race, talk about white privilege, talk about how they can invest more in their child's whole, healthy
so we'll find their numbers and also post that information. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. That's Lisa Marie Rollins, lecturer, actress, and author of Ungrateful Daughter. And Ginger, what would you say?
I would just say again that support is important. Encouragement and empowerment is important. Helping your children identify with who they are is important. But more importantly, it is the love in that household that is ultimately going to shape that person. So I'm sticking with love, Barbara. I'm sticking with love.
Sticking with love. We really appreciate that. And that is Ginger Savage. She was raised by her biological mother and her stepfather, both white. And you now have an African-American family that you are raising. And we thank you so much for sharing your story. We appreciate that. And before we leave you today, let me tell you about an event that's happening on the peninsula. The YWCA Virginia Peninsula is holding a My Sister's Closet Suit and dress sale. It's an opportunity for women to get gently used clothing to wear on job interviews. All the proceeds help fund YWCA Virginia Peninsula programs that empower women and children. The event is Saturday, March the 28th from 8 until noon at the YWCA Virginia Peninsula Building, Orcutt Avenue in Newport News. Call 757-245-6026 for more information, and I am sure that they would also love it if you had some gently used clothing to donate to that cause. If you enjoyed today's broadcast and you'd like to hear it again, please visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And while you're there, you can sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows, and we are so close to 1,000 likes on Facebook. So please go to our Another View Radio page and like us. Next week, the Another View Roundtable pundits are on board with their take on current events. And as you already know, it's going to be a lively show. Our theme music was composed and produced by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer. And Kamaria Mason bravely answered our phones even through some of the technical difficulties we had. So thank you, Kamaria, for that. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Make it a fantastic weekend. Don't forget, we spring forward on Sunday morning at 2 a.m. We want to meet you on time next Friday at noon for Another View.